everyone, Irina Ninen, thank you for joining us. President Trump says that the White House will release a transcript of his second call with the Ukrainian president on Tuesday. He spoke to reporters on his way to Alabama Saturday afternoon.
They want to have a transcript of the other call, the second call, and I'm willing to provide that. We'll probably give it to you on Tuesday, Monday being a holiday. We'll probably give it to you on Tuesday, but we have another transcript coming out, which is very important. They asked for it, and I'd gladly give it. There's never been a president who's been so transparent. This is a witch hunt.
Well, it comes after the impeachment inquiry transitioned into a more public process this week. The committees investigating the president released transcripts of closed-door testimony from 8 witnesses. That includes former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, Michael McKinley, who's a former top advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, U.S. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, Bill Taylor, who's the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, and 4 others. Public hearings are set to begin next week. Well, for his part, President Trump continues to slam the impeachment process at an event in Atlanta on Friday. He accused Democrats of trying to nullify the 2016 election.
Now Democrats and the media have launched, and they are partners, you know that, the deranged, hyper-partisan impeachment witch hunt, a sinister effort to nullify the ballots of 63 million patriotic Americans. Not happening, by the way. It's failing. It's failing fast. It's all a hoax. It's all a hoax. It's failing fast. Democrats are willing to destroy the foundations of our society and the pillars of our justice system and judicial system in their craven pursuit of power and money.
Well, Democrats say that most of the witnesses' testimonies support the whistleblower's complaint that President Trump tried to extort Ukraine's leader by withholding military aid until Ukraine announced an investigation into one of the president's political rivals. Republicans emphatically dispute that claim. I want to bring in Siobhan Hughes. She's a Capitol Hill reporter for the Wall Street Journal and joins us now. So, Siobhan, thank you for joining us. You know, a lawyer for John Bolton says that his client has new information on these meetings with Ukraine. Bolton, of course, is a former national security advisor. I'm curious what your sources are telling you about the type of information Bolton might have.
So we don't know exactly what John Bolton knows, but what we do know is that he was well positioned to have a type of access that none of the witnesses has so far had. As the national security advisor, John Bolton was essentially Donald Trump's right-hand man on national security issues, would have been in the room with him, also in the room with other key players like Mick Mulvaney, Gordon Sondland. Mr. Bolton has a reputation for being very direct, very forthcoming. Even Democrats say that if they don't always agree with his politics, they can trust his information.
You know, what also is new and developing is Republicans are calling on Hunter Biden, the whistleblower, and a handful of other witnesses to testify in open hearings. What's the likelihood of that actually happening?
So it seems highly unlikely that Hunter Biden would come in to testify, and that's in part because of the way the rules are structured. While the minority is allowed to suggest witnesses, the majority essentially has veto power, and if the name Hunter Biden were put to a vote, it is highly doubtful Democrats would vote to bring him in for questioning.
So when you look back at this past week, Siobhan, you know, the House released more than 2,000 pages of transcripts from these closed-door testimonies. For you, what do you think some of the big takeaways have been?
Well, there are a couple of takeaways, and they're on 2 fronts. One is on substance and one is on character. On the substance front, we are hearing people like Bill Taylor, Fiona Hill, testify to the fact that they were told by Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, that there was a quid pro quo. In fact, more than one. One involving a White House meeting as leverage to convince Ukraine to open investigations, and one involving military aid, which would not be released until the investigations were committed to. There's also the subject of character. 3 witnesses are going to testify next week, and it is their personality, their credibility that will be on the stand. And at least from what we have seen so far in the transcripts, the 3 witnesses, the former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, George Kent, Bill Taylor, all come across as knowledgeable, as in command of the facts, and at least one of them, George Kent, also showed himself someone willing to spar with Republicans, push back when he felt their questioning included presumptions that were false.
Your newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, is reporting that Steve Bannon, who we know is the president's former campaign chairman, told jurors that Roger Stone was the campaign's access point to WikiLeaks. Can you give us a little bit more sense about this and about what Bannon may have said?
So this is important because Roger Stone is accused of lying to Congress. And what Roger Stone has said is that he absolutely was not the conduit to WikiLeaks. That was a different person, he claims, Randy Credico. What Mr. Bannon is doing is completely undercutting the argument of Roger Stone. Bannon is saying that, in fact, he was told by Roger Stone that Roger Stone had an in with WikiLeaks. That was absolutely Roger Stone's representation. And Steve Bannon, of course, would have been in a position, certainly, to have that information because he did, at least for a time, have a key role on the Trump campaign.
So what do you think that means for this overall impeachment inquiry?
Well, that in some ways bears more a little bit on the Mueller investigation, but there are points at which some of these two separate investigations start to merge. And it's not clear to me whether the Intelligence Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Democrats are going to get together and bring some of those convergences out. But one point of convergence is Paul Manafort, who, of course, got in trouble and ended up getting sentenced over his consulting work in Ukraine. And so that's one of the threads that I'm very, very interested in following.
Interesting to hear you say that. You know, 3 Senate Republicans, Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, all refusing to sign a resolution denouncing the House's investigation. How is that being interpreted on the Hill?
So that's being interpreted as a sign that there is at least some Republican willingness to consider voting to convict Donald Trump should he in fact be impeached by the House. At the same time, that's limited. It's only 3 people, and with that 53-47 majority, just 3 votes would not be enough to convict Donald Trump. But on the other hand, it shows that Donald Trump's lock on the party is not absolute. There are still some people willing to be independent. And Susan Collins, of course, up for re-election next year in a state in which her independence may be crucial to her re-election.
You know, Siobhan, just when you think you know the way things are going to turn out, something surprises you. Some testimony, something. There's always something, I feel, with this story that is always worth keeping an eye on. I want to thank you very much, Siobhan Hughes, for joining us for the Wall Street Journal.
Good to be here.